A crane arm reaches up over the roof of a factory in East London, and then it presses down, driving clean through the roof. Not to pull the building down, to gut it, to haul the die-casting machines out into the open and load them onto lorries bound for Asia. Only a few years before this was the largest toy car empire in the world. 6,000 workers, 2 million cars leaving the lines every single day. A British icon that outsold both Ford and General Motors. And now it ends with a hole in its roof and its heart lifted clean out into the cold winter air. How does a company that beat Detroit at its own game come to this? The answer is not one single villain. It is a wound that never closed. Those machines were worth more than the building wrapped around them. To see why, you have to follow them backwards. Past the union battles and the bitter winters. Past the American toy that rewrote the rules in a single season. Back to a bombed-out pub, 2 men with their Navy discharge pay, and a third who could look at a lump of metal and see a fortune. The machines were born there, in a place that should have been torn down. The year is 1947. London is still half rubble. Bread is rationed, coal is rationed, and whole streets stand open to the sky where the bombs came down. 2 men named Leslie Smith and Rodney Smith, not related, friends from their service in the Royal Navy, pool their discharge money. About £600 between them. With it, they take on a wrecked building on the edge of Hackney, a bomb-damaged pub called the Rifleman. The roof leaks. The walls are scorched. By any sensible measure, the place should be flattened, not lived in. They move a metal casting operation in anyway. They are not toy makers, not yet. They cast small parts for industry, hooks for ceilings, little components for electrical goods, pieces for the slow grind of rebuilding a broken country. The money is thin and steady. The ambition is modest. Pay the rent, stay alive. Then the third man arrives. John Odell, known to everyone as Jack. Working-class East London, thrown out of school at 13, a former tank mechanic from the war. No diploma, no pedigree, and a feel for engineering that bordered on the unnatural. He could look at a casting machine and see, inside his own head, exactly how to make it run faster and cleaner than the men who built it ever meant it to. At first, he simply rents a corner of the Rifleman for his own gear. The 2 Smiths work out very quickly that his rent is the least valuable thing about him. What they need is what is inside his head. So the 3 of them lock together. Leslie, careful and tight with money, the one who sweats over every figure in the ledger. Rodney, steady, the man who keeps the machines turning. And Jack, who looks at a hunk of gray metal and sees something nobody else can. 3 temperaments, 1 shared problem. The rent is due, and the orders are never quite enough. What none of them can see, standing in that leaking building, is that the survival of the whole enterprise will turn on a war on the far side of the planet, and that one of the 3 will walk away too soon, certain the company is going nowhere. In 1948, they try something small, a die-cast road roller, a toy, copied openly from a popular model made by Dinky, the giant of British toy cars at the time. It is not original, it is barely theirs. But Jack Odell tools it so cleverly that they can make it for a fraction of what the bigger firms spend. The same detail, a lower cost. Sold for the kind of money a child could dig out of a pocket. That single idea, real quality at a price a child could reach, becomes the rule the whole company will live by for the next 30 years. But a copied road roller is not a business. It is a sideline for the slow months. Something to keep the machines busy when industry goes quiet. To turn it into something more, they need proof that the world actually wants what they can make. And they need to survive long enough to find that proof. When it finally came, that proof would arrive by pure accident, and they very nearly missed it altogether. In 1950, war breaks out in Korea. It is 5,000 miles away, and it very nearly kills the little company in the Rifleman. Zinc is a strategic metal. Governments want it for ammunition, not toys, and Britain rations it hard. For a firm whose entire craft is casting zinc alloy, that is close to a death sentence. The alloy they pour even has a name, Mazak, a British zinc mixture, prized because it floods a mold with fine detail and holds it. Starve a caster of zinc, and you starve the craft itself. When the restrictions ease, the industrial orders that had kept them alive stay unpredictable. Feast 1 month and famine the next. Rodney Smith looks at the books, looks at the future, and decides there isn't one. In 1951, he sells his share and walks away. He keeps faith with the steady world of industrial casting and leaves the toys behind. Leslie Smith and Jack Odell stay. Within a few short years, Rodney's caution will look like the most expensive decision of his life. The two who remain make a bet. If industrial work is going to lurch up and down like this, then the toys cannot stay a stopgap. They have to become the whole point. And to prove there is a real market out there, they need one product the public simply cannot resist. The chance comes in 1953. The country is preparing for the coronation of a young queen, Elizabeth II, and the whole of Britain is hungry for something to mark the day. Lesney gambles on a miniature of the Gold State coach, the great gilded carriage that carries the monarch. They tool up 2 versions, a large one and a small one. Here is the part that sounds invented and is not. They very nearly did not make the small one at all. There was a shortage of the metal they needed for the larger model, and it was that shortage, and nothing nobler, that pushed them toward the smaller, cheaper coach. The small coach went on to sell somewhere in the region of 1 million pieces. The accident born of scarcity, not the grand version they had planned around, was the one that made them. The coronation coach does 2 things. It clears their debts and finally buys them out of the ruined pub. And it teaches Leslie and Jack a lesson they will never unlearn. Small sells. Small, cheap, and everywhere. For the first time, the men from the Riflemen have real money and real choices. Better machines, more hands. Room to think past next month's rent. The question hanging over them now is not how to survive. It is how to turn one lucky coach into something permanent, something that does not depend on royal events or the quiet months of industry. Jack Odell already has the answer half formed in his mind. It will arrive as the best ideas often do, dressed up as a small domestic problem involving a child and a matchbox. The story every matchbox collector has heard goes like this. Jack Odell's young daughter Annie was allowed to bring things to school only if they fit inside a matchbox. She had been bringing spiders. So her father, to give her something better to carry, made her a tiny model that would slide neatly into that little cardboard box. It is a sweet story, and it may even be true. But sentiment was never the genius was the box. By building the toy and its packaging to the exact size of a household matchbox, Lesney solved a problem that had nothing to do with children and everything to do with shelves. A matchbox-sized car takes almost no counter space. It stacks, it ships cheaply, it can sit right beside the till in shops that would never carry an ordinary toy. Not just toy shops, but newsagents, sweet shops, tobacconists. The little corner places a child walks past every single day with a few coins in hand. That is the real invention. The toy stopped being something a parent bought for a birthday and became something a child could buy on a Tuesday with pocket money. A treat the size of a box of matches for the price of a box of matches. For a whole generation, the weekly ritual was the same. Walk to the corner shop. Stand at the spinning display. Choose the one car you could afford that week and carry it home in its own tiny box. In 1953, Lesney registers the Matchbox name. The first models in what becomes the 1 to 75 range begin to roll out. A road roller, a dumper, a cement mixer, a tractor. Plain working vehicles, the machines of a country still rebuilding itself, shrunk down and sold for coppers. Each one carried a number, and children learned those numbers the way they learned the names of footballers. In those first years, the little cars did not even reach the shops under the Lesney name alone. The selling was handled by a distributor, a man named Moses Konstam, whose old trade name Moko sat right beside Lesney on the earliest boxes. Only later did Lesney buy out that arrangement and put its own name, and its own name alone, on everything it made. Serious collectors still hunt those early Moco boxes to this day. The cars carried something else as well, stamped into the metal underneath. Made in England by Lesney. For a great many children in Britain and far beyond it, that small raised line on the underside of a toy car was one of the very first things they ever learned to read. In 1956, the company widens its reach with a second line, the models of yesteryear, finely detailed miniatures of vintage cars and old steam vehicles, aimed as much at grown collectors as at children. The little firm is no longer making one kind of toy. It is building a whole catalog. Demand explodes. Lesney outgrows its patched-together sites and pulls everything together in Hackney, on Lee Conservancy Road, into a plant that swells into something vast. By the middle of the 1960s, walk inside and the first thing to hit you is the air, hot oil, and the sharp metal tang of molten zinc. Then the noise. More than 150 casting machines running at once. A wall of sound that never lets up. Thousands of gallons of paint a week. Millions of small parts cast, sprayed and assembled, day after day, 2 million little cars rolling out at the company's peak. At its height, the plant employs around 6,000 people. A great many of them are women, drawn from the streets of the surrounding boroughs, working the assembly lines on piece rates, paid for speed, their hands moving faster than the eye can follow. The company runs its own buses, old London double-deckers, to gather the workers from their homes at dawn and carry them back at dusk. And the work does not stop at the factory wall. In front rooms across Hackney, whole families spend their evenings fitting small parts together, a cottage trade feeding the giant next door. For this corner of East London, Lesney is not just an employer. It is the thing that pays the rent on the entire neighborhood. By 1966, the company is turning out more than 100 million toys a year. The men from the leaking pub are, against every reasonable expectation, running one of the most successful toy operations on Earth. British-made, British-staffed, beating far larger rivals at their own trade. Recognition follows. In 1968, the very year everything is about to change, Jack Odell is appointed an officer of the Order of the British Empire. The boy expelled from school at 13, honored by the state for what he has built. It is the high watermark. From a leaking pub to a royal honor in barely 20 years. Neither he nor anyone sitting on the board can see that the tide has already begun to turn against them. If you grew up with one of these in your fist, you already know the weight of it, the way the wheels spun under your thumb. Before we follow the story down the far side of the mountain, I would like to know which one was yours. The first model you remember owning. Leave it in the comments below. I read them. And here, right at the summit, is where the danger begins. Because 3,000 miles away in Southern California, a very different kind of toy car is about to be born. One that does not care about realism at all. By 1968, success has hardened into certainty. The Matchbox philosophy is realism. Heavy little vehicles, accurate, durable, built to be shoved along a carpet and to survive being trodden on. The board believes, and Jack Odell believes it most of all, that this is what children want. Accuracy. Truth in miniature. Odell says it plainly. Children want the real thing, not fantasy. Then Mattel, the American company behind the Barbie doll, launches Hot Wheels. They are everything Matchbox is not. Thin axles riding in low friction bearings, so the cars run fast and far from a single flick of the hand. Wild metallic colors that no real car ever wore. Chrome wheels. Bright orange plastic track with loops and jumps. A Matchbox vehicle was a model of the world as it really was. A Hot Wheels car was a fantasy of pure speed, and it came with a racetrack to prove the point. On American playgrounds, the effect is fast and brutal. To a child choosing between a careful little delivery van and a flaming hot rod that can scream around a loop, the contest is over before it starts. And in 1969, a second American rival, Johnny Lightning, piles in with the very same idea. The bottom drops out of Lesney's American sales almost overnight. But here is the part the simple version of this story always misses. Not every child defected. Plenty of them, in America just as much as in Britain, never wanted the fantasy in the first place. They wanted the bus, the tractor, the fire engine that looked like a genuine fire engine. They stayed loyal to the realism, and what happened next would feel, to those loyal children, like a betrayal from their own side. Because Lesney panicked. Faced with collapsing orders, the company threw itself into a crash program called Superfast. Every tool, every die in the Hackney plant had to be reworked to take new thin axles and wider, faster wheels. It was a huge and frantic undertaking, carried out at desperate speed, swallowing money the company did not really have. The new wheels made the cars quicker. They also stripped away some of the very thing the loyalists loved. The faithful little models that had felt like small real machines now rolled on flashy wheels, chasing an American look. To many of the children who had stayed, the originals suddenly became the slow ones, demoted, handed down to younger brothers. Decades later, they would still talk about it as the moment the soul went out of the toy. The numbers from that first shock tell their own story. In 1969, the company swung from record profit to a heavy loss, and a large tax bill on the previous good year fell due at exactly the same moment. They survived it. They retooled, they steadied, they kept the gates open. In the short term, Superfast worked. Sales recovered. The board told itself the storm had passed. What it did not see was the size of the wound underneath. The frantic retooling had drained the company's reserves right down at the worst possible moment, just as the whole world economy was about to turn dark. This was the cut that never properly healed. From here on, there would be no cushion left, no margin for error. And the 1970s were about to deliver error after error, almost none of it entirely Lesney's own doing. The 1970s arrived like one long bad winter. The price of raw materials climbs, oil-based plastic for the wheels, zinc for the bodies, everything dearer year on year. Britain lurches through strikes, power shortages, and inflation that eats wages and savings alike. The easy family feeling of the early Hackney years begins to fray under constant pressure to make more, faster, for less. The factory floor is heavily unionized, and this is where the story splits, exactly as it still splits today in the minds of the people who lived through it. On one side stand the toolroom men, the most skilled workers in the plant, the aristocracy of the floor, whose knowledge of metal and molds could not simply be hurried or replaced. When management demanded faster output and lower costs, they pushed back, and they had the power to make that pushback bite. In 1976, the company tried to reorganize shift patterns and strip out overtime. When a group of machine setters refused the new terms and were dismissed, they claimed redundancy pay. The case climbed all the way to the Court of Appeal, where Lord Denning ruled in the company's favor. If the amount of work stays the same, he found, then merely changing the terms does not create a redundancy. It was a victory for Lesney on paper. On the factory floor, it landed like a betrayal, and the trust between the people who made the toys and the people who ran the company never fully recovered. Now, who was to blame for what came next is the oldest argument in British industry, and you will have your own answer waiting. Some look at Hackney and see unions demanding more than a competitive business could ever give. Others look and see management and financiers squeezing the very people who built the product. Both sides were there. Both were true at the same time. I suspect a good number of you worked in places exactly like this, on one side of that line or the other. If you did, I would honestly like to hear it. Tell me below whether you think it was the unions, the bosses, or something far bigger than both of them. I am reading every reply, because there was something far bigger than both. By the start of the 1980s, the company is caught in a vice that no amount of goodwill on the factory floor could ever loosen. Bank debt has climbed past £20 million. The British pound has risen sharply, which sounds like good news, and is in fact a catastrophe for an exporter, Because it makes every British-made car painfully expensive in America, the very market Lesney needed most. Meanwhile, its rivals have already shifted production to Hong Kong and to Macau, where labor costs a small fraction of a hackney wage. The arithmetic turns merciless. Years later, men who had spent their lives in British casting would describe the same brutal sum playing out in one industry after another. The finished price a foreign factory charged, delivered to your door, barely covered the cost of the raw metal before a single British hand had even touched it. You cannot outwork a number like that. Lesney does what trapped companies do. It closes 10 of its 13 plants. Between 1980 and 1982, it cuts its workforce by around 41%. Thousands of jobs gone. And still the debt grows faster than any savings can. The only question left is who would ever be willing to buy a dying British icon, and what exactly they would do with it once they had. In June 1982, it ends. Creditors declare Lesney Products insolvent, and the receivers move in to pick over what is left. By the height of that summer, the receivership is formal, and the company that made Matchbox is reshaped on paper into a smaller shell, kept breathing only long enough to be sold. For the people of Hackney, the news lands like a bereavement. The plant that had seemed as fixed and permanent as anything in the borough, the place that had fed families for a generation, simply stops. The lines fall silent. The works buses no longer run their dawn routes through the streets. For the women who had given decades to those assembly lines, and for the toolmakers whose hard-won skill had no obvious home anywhere else in a shrinking Britain, the closure was never simply the loss of a wage. It was the loss of a place to belong. A factory like this one had been the spine of a whole district, the reason the streets around it kept a rhythm to their day. When it stopped, something far larger than a payroll stopped along with it. A buyer is found. He is not British. His name is David Ye, born in Shanghai, the founder of a Hong Kong toy firm called Universal. Ye had started his working life as a bank clerk and built himself into a major figure in the Asian toy trade, and he understood one thing with perfect clarity. Manufacturing follows the cost of labor. In September 1982, he buys the Matchbox name and its assets. For Ye, the logic is clean and without a trace of sentiment. The brand is gold, known and trusted right across the world. The factory in Hackney is simply an expensive way of making the product. So he keeps the first and discards the second. The name lives on, the plant dies. Production is moved east to Macau. And that is why in those final weeks the crane comes. The custom-built die-casting machines, the ones Jack Odell and his engineers had coaxed into casting 2 million pieces a day, are too large and too valuable to leave behind. So rather than dismantle the building gently around them, the new owners simply open the roof and lift them straight out. The heart of the place hauled up through the top of its own body and swung out over the road machines built by British hands to make British toys, turning slowly in the open air on their way to the docks and then to Asia. The empire was not quietly wound down. It was torn out through the roof it had hummed beneath for 30 years, one machine at a time. Somewhere in all of this, on the underside of the cars themselves, a small line of raised metal letters quietly changed. Made in England by Lesney became Made in Macau. Children far too young to read a balance sheet noticed it all the same, turning a new car over in their hands and feeling, without quite knowing why, that something was missing. But one man refused to let the story end on a crane. Jack Odell was 62 years old, and he could have walked away rich and finished. Instead, watching those machines leave, he went back to the receivers and bought some of the old tooling himself, including the dies for the vintage models he had always loved best, the range called Models of Yesteryear. He set up a fresh company in Enfield and gave it a name that was simply his own surname read backwards. Ledo. For another 17 years, Ledo went on casting die-cast vehicles in England. A stubborn refusal to accept that the skill had to die just because the corporation had. The men and the talent had not vanished. Only the business that once held them together had. The Hackney plant itself stood empty for years, a vast silent shell beside the canal, until it was finally pulled down in 2010. Flats stand on the spot now. Among the new buildings, there is a small memorial to what used to be made here, a loop of oversized track with a couple of model cars frozen forever mid-race. You can walk straight past it and never once guess that this quiet patch of riverside used to roar. The cars, though, survived. They survived in their millions in attics and shoeboxes and glass cabinets all over the world. Collectors now hunt the rare ones with real devotion, especially the odd factory mistakes, a wrong color, a transitional model from the super-fast Panic with the old body and the new wheels still fitted together. There is a tale, passed quietly between collectors, that some of the strangest color errors were the work of bored workers playing with leftover paint at the end of a shift. There is even a story that rejected cars were tipped onto a local dump and covered over with clay at once, so that the lorry drivers could not fish them out and carry them home to their own children. Whether every word of that is true or not, those little flaws are prized now as fingerprints, proof of the human hands that once stood at those machines. And the question that started all of this still hangs in the air. Why did it really fall? Was it the unions, the bosses, the rising pound, the cheaper East, the American toy that changed the rules? It was all of them, leaning on the same building at the same time. If any one of them was the hinge, it was the Panic of 1969. The year the company spent the reserves that might have carried it through everything that came after. Britain did not lose Matchbox because the toy stopped being loved. It is loved still. Britain lost it because the particular arithmetic that had made it possible in Hackney, cheap skilled labor, protected markets, a craft handed from one pair of hands to the next, quietly stopped adding up. For some children, the loss was never even about Britain. Behind the Iron Curtain, in Poland and Romania, in a dozen places where Western toys were almost impossible to find, a single Matchbox car was treasure. That little line under the chassis, made in England, was a window onto a wider world that most of them could only dream of reaching. A child in a gray apartment block in Warsaw, turning that small, heavy car over in cold hands, was holding a piece of a place he had never seen and might never be allowed to visit. The toy outran the politics, it always did. So I will leave the last word to you. If you owned these cars, or built them, or sold them, or carried one through an airport as a child because you would not let it go, tell me about it below. Tell me the model, the color, the year, the shop where you bought it. Tell me if your family worked the lines at Hackney, or at Rochford, or at any of the other plants. These little cars, scattered across the world, are the real museum now, and your memories are the labels on the glass. Share them, and I will read every single one.